Hey, we're in a series in the life of David. Nate kicked this off a couple weeks ago. The first week, Nate talked about how God invites us out of the baggage and to the table. Week 2, Nate talked about how before David faces Goliath, he has to face rejection. That rejection has a way of reminding us of who we are and refining what we're called to. And this week, we're going to be in 1 Samuel 22. And in 1 Samuel 22, it says this: David left Gath and escaped to the cave of Adullam. I actually want to stop there. Before we go any further, I thought I'd share a bit of my journey with you. In the fall of 2018, my wife Jessica and I decided that we would lead and start a young adult ministry. It was called Reveal. And we spent months just praying and dreaming and planning this whole thing out. We thought that this would be it for us. This would be the thing that launched us into the next big thing. If I'm honest, I wanted this to be the platform. I wanted God to breathe on it so that I could be known. This would be the thing that propelled me into this great future. And I had high hopes for it. But 8 months into this thing, we found ourselves actually laying it down. We found ourselves in over our heads, exhausted, not quite sure what to do, and we found ourselves hanging up the gloves. And the months that followed were especially difficult. I found myself feeling frustrated at myself, frustrated at God, asking questions like, God, I thought this was it. God, I'd been waiting for my moment. I thought this was my moment. I found myself asking God questions like, God, where are you in the middle of all of this? Because it doesn't feel like you're here. And if I'm honest, I felt like a failure. I felt like a fraud. I felt like I wasn't qualified for what you had called me to. Have you ever found yourself there? I like to call the season of my life the cave or the wilderness. And I think many of you are there too. Many of you, you're asking these same questions. You find yourself in a difficult situation, in a difficult season, wondering where God is at. And in this story, David in the cave, he's in that very same place. But I think that the cave for David is a significant part of his journey. I think it's one of the most pivotal parts of his journey. And here's why. Let me lead you up to this moment. Let me recap his life up until this point. So you have young David, called by God, anointed by Samuel. And we know the story. We know the story well. At some point, David comes face to face with a giant. He musters up courage and faces this giant and kills this giant. From there, he gets success. He's famous. He's well known. He gets married. He has successful military ventures. He's successful in battle. He's serving the king. He finds a friend in Jonathan. Things are going well for him. But in a strange turn of events, the king Saul gets jealous and on several different occasions tries to take David's life. And so David starts running for his life. He starts living in fear, going from one place to the next. And all of a sudden, he's torn away from his family, from his friends, from his wife. It says that at some point, David finds himself at Nob. He's running, he goes to Nob, and at this point, he's so desperate, he's hungry. And so he comes face to face with Ahimelech, the priest there. And out of desperation, lies to the priest. He says, I'm on a mission from the king. Give me some food. Convinces him to give him some food. And out of desperation, because he feels like he needs to protect himself, he needs a weapon. And so he asks the priest, hey, is there a weapon here? The priest says, yeah, actually Goliath's sword is here. And so David lies again and says, give me the sword. I'm on a mission from the king. After this, he flees, he runs again, and he finds himself at Gath. Gath, the land of Goliath. He finds himself here, and it says that he goes to Achish, the king of Gath, and they find out who David is, and David, fearful for his life, devises a plan to escape, and it says that he pretends to be a madman. It says that he acts like a madman, making marks on the doors of the gate, and he lets saliva run down his beard. He escapes, and he ends up 1 Samuel 22 in the cave. Gone is the boy who had the courage to stare down a giant. Gone is the young man who feared nothing, who was successful, who had fame. Gone was that man, and here we find a man full of fear, frustrated at God, probably feeling like a failure, foaming at the mouth. What a difference. And I imagine the questions David is asking at this point. God, how did we get here? God, this isn't what I signed up for. I thought I was going to be a king. I imagine David full of frustration saying, God, where are you right now? Because this is the last place I want to be. Probably feeling like a failure, probably wondering, God, are you even here? And if we're honest, when we find ourselves in these cave moments, in these seasons of life where things are especially difficult, we ask those same questions, and it can feel like God is left. And in some ways, it can feel like a punishment because that's where we go. Somewhere along the way, we've bought into this lie. We've made this weird connection between performance and presence. We believe this lie that following God means that everything's going to go well, and as long as everything goes well, that means God is with me. But God forbid something go wrong in life. Because if something goes wrong, it must mean that God is left. It must mean that I messed up somewhere. It must mean that I did something wrong. We've bought into this lie. We've bought into this lie that maybe I'm here because God is punishing me. We think that we're exempt from pain. We think that we're exempt from suffering, don't we? But we are not exempt. If you think that you're exempt, tell that to the men that we read about in the Bible. Moses, who had to wander in the desert. Joseph, who found himself in a pit and in prison. Paul, who found himself in prison. David, who found himself in a cave. Jesus, who wandered in the wilderness and found himself in the grave. Surely, if Jesus faced the grave, you can face your cave. We are not exempt from pain. We are not exempt from suffering. In fact, I would dare say that there is a side of God that you can only experience in these places in your life, in the cave, in the wilderness, in the grave. See, I'm convinced that the cave wasn't a punishment for David. It was actually a gift. It was a gift. Because imagine you're David, and up until this point, you've been running for your life. Imagine the pace that he's living in. Imagine running from place to place, full of fear, full of anxiety, not knowing whether or not you're going to live to see another day. Imagine living that kind of life, a life on the run. See, I imagine that it's difficult to offer your heart to God when you're living in the hurry. I imagine it's hard to feel his heart at all when you're living a life that David lived. Perhaps it was grace. Perhaps it was grace that slammed on the brakes and caused David to come into the cave so that he could come face to face with God, offering all the things that he's feeling, offering God his heart. Perhaps it was grace that got him there. The cave wasn't a punishment, it was a gift. Perhaps the cave was everything David needed at that moment. Everything his heart needed. See, I bet that if David had kept this up, if he would have kept running, if he would have kept going from place to place, lying to priests, pretending to be a madman, he would have eventually become the man he was pretending to be. The madman he was pretending to be would have become him if he would have kept this up. But because of grace, there's a pause. There's there's a moment where David can pause and just come face to face with God and everything that he's feeling. It's a gift. See, I think the cave is also a gift because in the cave, God actually does something. There's something that God does here. And what exactly is it that God does? It says in the other part of verse 1, it says that when his brothers and his father's household heard about this, they went down to him there. Here David is in the cave, and all of a sudden his family finds out about this, and they go to him. What's significant about this moment is that we read earlier in his story that his brothers and his family actually rejected him. Now all of a sudden, they're coming to him, perhaps comforting him, perhaps just wanting to be with him. That's restoration, isn't it? So in the cave, David finds restoration. In verse 2, it says that all those who were in distress or in debt or discontented gathered around him, and he became their commander. About 400 men were with him. David, probably feeling like a fraud, not knowing if he's the man qualified for the job, finds himself surrounded by 400 men. It's as if God is saying, you got this. You're still the man for the job. You're still the one who's supposed to be king. Let me prove it to you. Even if you feel disqualified, I'm going to bring the men to you asking to be led. That's redemption, isn't it? In the cave, there's restoration, there's redemption. But in the cave, there is a beautiful exchange that happens between David and God. David writes a couple psalms while he's in the cave, Psalm 57, Psalm 142, and in both of these psalms, David is crying out to God, saying, God, this is what's happening. People are out to get me. No one cares about me. I'm running for my life. But at the very end of Psalm 142, David says, but God, your faithfulness reaches to the skies. God, you're faithful. It's as if every time every time David offers his heart to God, God meets him in it. In Psalm 57, David again crying out to God, God, people are out to get me, they're out for my life. God, no one cares about me. And right in the middle of the psalm, there's a shift that happens, and David proclaims, God, you're my refuge. You're all I need. There's an encounter, there's an exchange that happens in the cave. See, I'm convinced that the cave is a gift. David had every right to hang up the gloves, didn't he? By the time he gets to this point, if anyone had the right to be frustrated at God, it would have been David. If anyone had the right to feel like a failure, to feel disqualified, it would have been David. David could have stayed in his frustration and gotten jaded with God. So God, I'm out, I'm done. This isn't what I signed up for. David could have stayed feeling like a failure, saying, God, pick someone else, call someone else. I'm not fit to be the king. But David doesn't do that. Perhaps it's because David realizes that God is up to something here. See, your perspective matters. If you convince yourself that the cave is a punishment, you will do everything you can to claw your way out, to cope, to complain, to cry, hoping that someone else pulls you out. But if you believe that God is in it, you will turn your heart to God and you will say, God, you're doing something here, I'm in. You will find restoration, you will find redemption, you will find an encounter with God waiting for you there. I know that in the moment, that in the cave, it's hard to get all the answers you want. And if I'm honest, I don't fully understand the timing of things. I still don't. It's a mystery to me. And if I'm honest, I don't always know why things don't go according to plan. If I'm honest, I don't know why there are seasons of my life where I feel more like a fraud and a failure than someone who's favored by God. I don't understand. There are things that I still don't know. But here's what I do know. Church, this is what I know. I know that in the middle of what feels like a cave, God is in it. I know that God is present. I know that God is working. I know that He is faithful. I know that He is with us. I have to believe that. I know that He is up to something. He's up to something greater than I could even imagine. And I know what matters more than any platform. I know that what matters more than any dream, more than any of that stuff, is His presence. At the end of the day, more than any of those things, I just want to be able to say, God, You are my refuge and You are all I need. And if it takes walking into a cave, if it takes wandering in the wilderness, if it takes facing my grave, if it takes that for me to be able to confidently say, God is my refuge, He's all I need, He's all I want, then I'm in. I'm in. Church, I want to pray for you. For those of you who feel frustrated at God, for those of you wondering, where are you, God, in the middle of everything going on? For those of you who are feeling fearful or frustrated or feeling like a failure, I want to pray for you. God, we thank You that You never leave us. That even when You feel far, You're near. That even though we don't fully understand, You're up to something. And You're up to something good because You are only good. God, we lay down our well thought out plans. We lay down our desire for platforms. We lay down those things that actually might distract us from You. And God, we just say we're in. We just want You. And whatever that takes, whatever it takes for us to get to that point, God, would You do it? Would You do it? We love You, Jesus. In Your name we pray. Amen.